Hello, everybody. Dale here. Today, I want to make a video. Hopefully, it won't be too long. I want to share with you something that's near and dear to my heart. It's something that's one of the most important topics that I can talk to you about if you are a family member, if you're a parent, or if you're a friend of someone who has a deaf child. And this is vital. You're literally what I'm going to talk to you about is so important that literally your child's life hinges upon it. It's that important. So if you have a if you're a parent of deaf children or a deaf child, if you're a family member of a deaf child, or if you know somebody that has a deaf child, listen up. Okay, and this is important. So first thing I want you to do, go online, look up something called delayed language acquisition. Delayed language acquisition. That's critical for this conversation. So go look up delayed language acquisition deaf. Delayed language acquisition deaf. Look it up. And what you're going to find there is what I'm going to talk about today. So I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you a couple stories, and one of them they're all true stories, and they happened in my life and personal experience and things that I saw with my own eyes. And one was outside of my family, but work related, but still impacts me to this day. And the other one was very in my home. Okay, in my home. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Dale Cates. Both of my parents are deaf. I am a CODA, child of deaf adults. Both my parents are deaf. I grew up in a home. It was a wonderful home. I learned to speak English in my home, and I learned to speak American Sign Language in my home. So, okay, it was cool. I learned to sign in my home. And that was my first language along with English. Actually, probably sign language was before spoken English, most likely. I don't know for sure, but most likely. Um, so I remember in 1996, I moved to Hampton, Virginia, and I got a job with Hampton City Schools, the government school system there in Hampton, Virginia. And they assigned me to Francis Mallory Elementary School. I think the school's closed now, but Francis Mallory Elementary School on Big Bethel Road in Hampton, Virginia. It's a primary school, elementary school, and there were a group of deaf kids there. And part of my job duties was to develop language in these kids. Okay, to teach these deaf kids sign language. That's part of my job, and I was happy to do that. I was more than happy to do that. One of the students, and let me say this: all the kids' parents were willing to learn for their children to learn sign language. Not all the parents were willing to learn sign language themselves, but the majority of the parents did make some effort to learn sign language, but they allowed their children to learn language, which was very wise on their behalf. And of course, they're going to let their kids learn language. Why wouldn't they let their kids learn language? You know, delayed language acquisition is is one of the most devastating things you could do to your kid. One of the most damaging things you could do to your kid if you're a parent. And I know that parents, I'm talking generally here. There are exceptions, of course, but generally speaking, any normal person that has a child cares about that child and wants that child to do well in life. I get that. I understand that. So, but there are a lot of parents out there who refuse, for any number of reasons, to learn sign language or to teach their children sign language. And let me give you an example. I'm going to get into a truth. I'm going to get into this story. So, imagine this. Let's say that you have a child that can hear. They can hear. They can speak. Their ears fully functional. But instead of talking to that child, hello, Bottle. Let's just call this one Bottle, okay? Hey, Bottle, how are you? I love you, Bottle. Good morning to you, Bottle. And Bottle's trying to talk to you, and you're having, there's a baby that comes to my house a lot, and and he blah blah blah. But his parents talk to him. They're communicating with him, and he's getting language that way. And that's you think, oh, that's normal, of course. But imagine this, because this happens more than you can imagine. Let's say you have, well, let's say you have deaf kid. Let's say you have deaf kid over here. You got Bottle. He's hearing, hey Bottle, blah 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 blah, and Bottle even starts up, baby, and he learns language and he is able to speak. And you're talking to your kid Bottle about the weather, about the dog, about the cat, about everything, about life. Let's say that you have a deaf kid. Let's say that there's a deaf kid, and this kid cannot hear, and the parents, instead of learning sign language, are going, "Oh my gosh, my kid's deaf. I need to communicate. Let me get them sign language." Most parents, or many parents, don't do that. Huh? Yeah, they don't do that. Instead, they go, "Oh, my kid's deaf. I'm gonna teach him to speak." And so they go about going, "Hi, and the kids over there going, "Ah, uh, uh." If the kid's profoundly deaf, odds are that he or she is not going to speak. That's we can look at the history of profoundly deaf people, and we can see that the majority of them, I don't know percentages, okay, but I do know the majority of them never learn verbal language to the level of ability to use it in day-to-day conversation. Some do, but very few. Um, Most will just learn a few words, but they won't use, they're not going to have a conversation like this with verbal language. So the question is, why do parents do that to their kids? And I don't have the definitive answer for that. I know some of the reasons why, and I, I guess a lot of it comes with lack of knowledge on the parents' behalf. They don't understand what deafness is, or what it means, or what sign language is, or what it means to the child's ability to communicate and function in the real world. And they got a lot of misconceptions and a lot of wrong ideas. And most deaf kids are born into families that don't have any knowledge of deafness, no sign language, no knowledge of deafness at all. So I got it. As a parent who has a deaf child, somebody has a deaf child, they don't have the knowledge in the background, and then they go and talk to the wrong people. And they said, "Oh yeah, put them in speech therapy. Yeah, get them talking." And they put them through hell for a number of years, and the kid never gets it. And all the while, a lot of these parents never learn to sign, and a lot of the family members never learn to sign. And I don't mean like one word: bathroom, one word; water, one word; cat. I'm not talking about one word. Okay, come on, man. Really? Are you going to talk to you? Well, let me give you an example. If you got Bottle here, he can hear. And if you, as a parent or a parent, were to take him or her and say, and Bottle's over, and you just go, dog, and you use one word sentences with Bottle who can hear, you're probably going to have a visit from some of state officials regarding child protective services. Yeah, probably deserve to have a visit. Um, but if you do that with your deaf child, it's hard to learn sign language, right? It's really hard. It's really hard. I want my kid to be normal. I want my kid to hear. Your kid's deaf, man. Your kid's deaf. Get over it. And get over your ego and your pride, because that's what's damaging your kid is your ego and your pride. Yep, I said it. And I'm going to tell you a true story. 1996. I was working Francis Mallory Elementary School. One of the children at the time was 5 years old. In 1996, so that's 28 years ago. 28, 29, 31, 32, 33. So this young man would be 33 years of age now. And I'm in the process of seeing if I can find out what happened to him, because I'm curious as a case study, not for any official case study, but just for my own knowledge. I was working Francis Mallory Elementary School. They gave me this boy. I'm not going to use his real name, but his name was, for this case, would be Mike. Okay. And Mike had no language, delayed language acquisition. His parents had, and that's about all he got out of it. That's all he understood, which is about as much as you understood. Nothing. And the excuse was, oh, sign language is so hard to learn. So hard. I can tell you what's hard is when your kid grows up and he's got no language, and your kid grows up and he suffers from the devastating effects of delayed language acquisition. That's hard. That's hard. So while I was working there with Mike, I was teaching him language, and you could see he was starting to get stuff. Lights were coming on. He was starting to get language, and we were actually having real conversations. It doesn't take that long. The human mind is an amazing thing. It really is. You're created in God's image, and you got a brain, okay? And the human mind is an amazing thing. And this kid Mike was picking up language and starting to get it, and we were able to have conversations, and it was like life. You could see him coming to life. He was actually able to express himself completely, and it was cool to watch. It was so cool to see. Well, for a number of reasons, Mike's parents decided that he was going to be hearing. They talked to some doctors, and the doctors had lied to them. You know, I appreciate doctors and medical professionals, but I'm also wary of them because I know that there's a lot of money in the medical industry, and they can make a lot of money with certain procedures and things. So, first year, Mike's getting language, and he's starting to pick stuff up. And the following year, summer break, he comes back, and I'm told, no sign language. What? No sign language? What are you talking about? Mike's going to be hearing. The doctor told us they were going to be able to do this procedure, and Mike's going to be hearing. And I looked at the mother because I don't know where the dad was. Problem right there. He was in the house, but he wasn't at the meeting. He was never in any meetings. Dads, get involved in your kid's life. That's important too. But the mom was at every meeting, and and the mother told me that the doctor said the kid was going to be hearing after this procedure. He'd be normal, and no more sign language. And I was told not to use sign language with Mike. And I then proceeded to tell a very true story to the dismay of my supervisors who were in the room. They didn't want me to. They were, but I had to tell the truth, and I told the truth that day. I didn't get fired. Thought I was going to get fired, but I didn't. And the story was this: in 1980, I want to say it was 1988. It could have been 1987, but I think it was 1988. In 1987, my mother would have been 53 years of age. 1987. So my mom was 53, 54 years of age. I was 21 or 22 years old, 87, 88. And I was visiting my mother's home. My mother's mother had moved in with my parents. And at that time, in 87, she would have been 77, 78 years of age. And she was coming down the hall. I'm standing in the living room. My mother was in the kitchen. My grandmother's coming down the hall. And I witnessed this. And this just impacted me to this day. It's why I'm making this video. Grandmother's coming down the hall. Mom's here. Grandmother starts talking to my mother. Blah 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 blah, which happened all the time. And my mom usually would just go, "What?" Try to figure it out. But I guess at that point, my mom had had enough. And so my mom, to her credit, which I know this had to be hard for her to do, she just looked at her mother and said, "I don't understand anything you're saying. You never learned to sign with me. You never learned to talk to me. I'm deaf. I use sign language. And you never learned my language. I can't hear you. I don't speak English very well, but I do sign. And you never learned my language. And you never learned to talk with me. I don't know what you're talking about. And my grandmother started to cry. And my mother cried. And when I think about it, I cry. Because my grandmother realized that my mother, it was too late. My grandmother was nearing the end of her life. She died a couple of years later. My mother was 53, 54 years old. And you know what? You know what? My mother loves her mother to this day, still loves her mother. She loves her mother. And I love my grandmother. Okay. My grandmother's been dead since 1989. Why my mother still loves her mother, and I still love her mother, and I appreciate it. My mother appreciates every positive thing that my grandmother did for her. My mother is very grateful, and she'll tell you that. She will tell you that she's so thankful that her mother sent her to a school for the deaf at the time in would have been 1939, 1940. You know, she went to school. 1940, might have been a little bit later than that, early 40s, when she finally figured out it was a school for the deaf. And she sent my mother to the deaf school. My mother's very grateful for that. But I saw my grandmother realize that she never knew her own daughter because they didn't have a language they could communicate with. My mother was deaf. She's not going to have a conversation with anyone who spoke in English, ever. A basic conversation, but not a conversation. And you know, as a parent, if you have a child and you talk to your kid talks to you, you get to know your kid gets to know you, and you develop a relationship with your child. But if you have a deaf kid and all you do is teach them one word, a dog, dog, and I'm not making fun of anybody. That's how my dad would have spoken if he spoke. He was white. He didn't talk. He knew his voice wasn't pleasing. He knew that. And he knew he couldn't carry on a conversation. My dad used sign language. But if you have a kid that's deaf and you don't learn to communicate with them and all you try to do is speak to them, they're not getting what you're saying. And you're not developing a relationship. You'll never know your kid. Do you want to go through your life and have your kid at 50 something years old look at you and go, you never learned to talk to me. I don't understand anything you're saying. And then you realize your whole life is gone. You don't even know your kid. You don't know their wants, their desires, their dreams, their hopes, their goals, because you can't talk to them. So Mike's parents decided to listen to some doctor that lied to them because they trusted the so-called expert. Money, money, money. And they cut off his sign language. A couple of years later, and I told him that the story I just told you. I told his mother that, and she said, with her prideful ego, "That won't happen to my family. The doctor said my son will hear." Fast forward maybe 6, 7 years later, at some point, I was walking through a shopping center in Hampton, Virginia, Coliseum Mall. I was walking through a department store. Out from behind a clothes rack pops Mike. Look around, no mom. Mom's somewhere in the store, but I don't see her. So time to test this. The doctors say he's going to be hearing. Time to test this. And so I said, "Hi, Mike. How are you?" "Mike, I know your name is Mike. And I'm not using sign language. How are you? You okay?" Mike, guess what? Failure. He's not hearing. And he didn't understand a thing I said. because I said, "Hi, Mike. How are you?" And he just repeated his name, Mike. I know your name's Mike. How are you, Mike? I'm in the process of trying to find Mike today. I don't know if I'll be able to find him or not, if he's still in the area or not. But I want to know the main reason I want to find Mike is not that I just want to know what happened to him. I want to know 28 years later what was the results. What's his lifestyle? What's his occupation? That was his standard of living because his parents did not learn sign language. His parents did not learn to communicate with him. If you have a deaf child, if you have a family member that has a deaf child, if you have a family member that is a deaf child, or if you have a friend that has a deaf child, I'm telling you, learn sign language because delayed language acquisition is devastating. And if you love your kid, learn a language they can speak. If you love your kid, and I'm sure you do, learn, and your kid's deaf, learn sign language. Your kid is not going to, and not, I don't mean learn one sign, dog, cat. Learn complete sentences. Teach them complete sentences. They can learn it. Sign language is a real language. It's a real language with a complete set of rules, grammar, syntax. It's a real language. It's not some just throwing hand signs around. Okay, it's a real language. Just like English, just like Thai, just like Russian, just like French, just like any other language, sign language is a real language. And if you have a child or you know of a child in your family or friends of the family that's deaf, please, 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 yourself and encourage the family members to learn sign language. Quit fooling yourself because here's what I don't want to happen to you. And I truly mean this. I do not want you to be 78 years old coming down the hallway and you're talking to your kid and your kid look at you and say with their best voice they can do, I never learned, I don't speak, I'm deaf, you never learned my language, I don't understand you. I don't want that to happen to you. Get to know your kid. Know your kid. Develop a relationship with your kid. And if they're deaf, the way to do that is sign language. Get off your high horse. Get off your ego. Get off your pride and learn sign language. Your kids, if they're, I meet kids who they're as deaf as this desk. We're darn close to it. And they're not going to learn to speak the complete sentences, fluent, they're not going to learn to do what I'm doing right here on this video. They're never going to learn that. And they're not going to understand this. They're not going to understand it. And I know you say, well, it's so hard to learn sign language and I'm busy and I got a job and I got another kid and I got all this stuff I'm doing in my life. I know. I know you're busy. I know you've got work to do. You got to pay the bills. I got it. How important is your kid to you? Make the time. Because if you got time to go out and have a little social event every once in a while, every week or so, you got time to learn sign language. If you can play on your phone and chit chat with your friends on Facebook, Instagram, and all these other social media, post all these pictures and videos, and you're out doing all this stuff, you got time to learn sign language. The question is it a priority to you? And the question is your deaf child, this is hard, is your deaf child a priority? Or is it just too hard? Or you just don't understand the importance of language and the damage that's being done by not communicating with your child? Look up delayed language acquisition and look up delayed language acquisition deaf. Look that up and look up the effects of it. I hope you change your mind. I hope you learn to sign. I hope you love your kid enough to learn to talk to them in a language that they can understand. That's it. That's all I have to say. I made this video because I care. I'm not trying to beat anybody up or be hard on anybody, but I know that it may be perceived as that. So be it. Please, please, please learn to communicate with your child. Learn to communicate with your deaf child. Sign language. Your deaf child's not going to learn your language fluently enough to be able to communicate with you. They're deaf, especially if they're deaf. Okay? That's all I have to say. I'm here to help you. You can contact me if you need some help. I'm willing to help you. I want to help you. All right. Thank you.